Today we have a legend that I know a lot of you have been waiting for. I've been wanting to talk about this, and my idea of doing a video on this particular legend is what gave me the idea to start this feature to begin with. It's without a doubt the most requested legend, so let's get right to it. That's right, this week we're talking about Polybius. Now, if you're wondering what the hell is Polybius, that's okay. It's not exactly something you hear about too often. The story goes that in the early 80s, 1981 is usually the most common year cited, a mysterious arcade game called Polybius appeared. It was incredibly fun to the point of being addictive, with small crowds gathering around each cabinet. It's said that the people who played the game experienced side effects such as memory loss, insomnia, nightmares, and depression. Some versions of the legend even go so far as to say that one Polybius player committed suicide. Others experienced a completely different side effect, an aversion to all video games, with the legend saying that one person became so averse to video games that they became an anti-gaming activist. Supposedly, the arcade machines only appeared in Oregon and a few suburban areas in Portland. People claim that mysterious Men in Black type characters would appear from time to time and collect some sort of data, though nobody knows what that data was, and no one is ever seen collecting coins or tokens from the machines. Some say that the data they were collecting had to do with the gamers' reactions to the psychoactive effects of the machines. An undisclosed amount of time later, but surely in the same year, all Polybius machines were carted away and the game was never seen again. The type of game it was depends on who's telling the story, with some people saying that it was a puzzle game or a maze game, but some versions of the legend say that it was a 3D shooter similar to Tempest, which had come out the year before, and that it was the similar style of vector graphics. The company that created the game was called, and I'm trying to pronounce this here, Sinneslotion, I think, which is a German word that literally means extinguishes the senses. And by the way, Polybius itself is named after an ancient Greek historian who also dabbled in cryptography. The most common view is that the company was a sham and that the game was created by the United States government for unknown purposes, perhaps testing the effects that the game supposedly had on people. Some others have said that it was Atari who was behind it all. The delivery method for the psychoactive effects also differ, with some saying that the game flashed subliminal messages at the player, with others claiming that the graphics themselves were what caused the symptoms. The Polybius legend is quite an interesting one, and has been discussed a lot, and appears in pop culture a few times here and there. Probably the most notable example is a Polybius arcade cabinet that appeared in the episode of The Simpsons, next to another fictional machine called Triangle Wars, which Bart plays briefly. As a further joke, the front of the cabinet is stamped with "Property of U.S. Government." It was also featured in a two-part episode of the G4 TV series Blister, called Search for Polybius, which was originally actually going to be in 3 parts, but the show was cancelled. So, did the game ever exist? Come on, you really have to ask? Of course not. The idea is ridiculous. But it doesn't stop people that have a, I'll say, romanticized view of reality from adopting the story. So let's examine the facts. Nobody has ever heard a first-hand account of contact with a Polybius machine, and no one around today can reliably claim to have played it. The legend varies so much from telling to telling that people can't even seem to agree on what type of game it was. The supposed creator of the game, Ed Rotberg, has never been unearthed or heard from again, and the company that created it left no trace of their existence either. A ROM of the game has never been found, though various people have come forward claiming that they had one, but nobody has ever shared it or otherwise made it available for public study. The versions of the legend that claim that there was a suicide aren't backed up with any news reports or obituaries, and the anti-game activist never seems to have published anything or given any interviews. I didn't even know his or her name. While it's true that the government has most certainly used video games, this is usually the military using them as a training tool, using modified versions of games from Battlezone to Doom 2 to train troops. And in recent years they've even used video games as a tool for recruitment. But the idea of the government testing psychoactive effects of a video game is a bit silly upon further scrutiny. Firstly, supposed mysterious men would come and collect data from the game, but an arcade cabinet itself has no way of gathering data on how you react to playing it. Probably you could maybe put a hidden camera in one and retrieve the footage, but keep in mind this was supposedly 1981, and you'd be limited in terms of how much footage could be held. And this would only give a vague sensation of how people acted while playing the game, not after effects such as depression or nightmares. A few years ago, in 2006, a man by the name of Stephen Roach acted like his namesake and came out of the woodwork, claiming that not only was Polybius real, but that he had a hand in creating it. He went against the convention, the game being created by Atari or the government, and stated that it was a bit more innocent. A South American-based video game company, which has never been named, dabbled in vector graphics and accidentally created a game that had dangerous side effects. But Roach claims they were seizures, something that had not been attached to the previous legend. The disappearance of the game is said to be because the effects were discovered and it was nothing more glorious than a company recall. However, Roach's story is probably also nonsense. He posted this in an internet forum for arcade enthusiasts, and later on, when interviewed by GamePulse, he couldn't keep his story straight, and he seemed to have memorized a lot of it directly from Wikipedia. So my bet is that Steve Roach is just an attention-seeking liar. It's a shame, as his initial story was almost believable. But wait, you say, you've seen Polybius footage on YouTube, haven't you? Well, yes you have, but here's the story behind that. It's a PC game that was released in 2007. The game was featured on the site Rogue Synapse, and the owners of Rogue Synapse even created a site called, I'm going to try and say this again, sinuslochen.com, to download and play the game. The game, which was created with Dark Basic, was created to closely adhere to the details of Stephen Roach's post, to make it seem like it was the Polybius of legend. Many less-than-stellar individuals have uploaded footage from this PC game and claim to be playing a ROM of the original 1981 arcade game using a MAME emulator, but of course that game never existed in the first place. So where did all this come from? Well, there are various theories, some saying that it started on Usenet as an outright hoax, and this may have some credibility, as Usenet first came into existence in 1979. But were people using it for hoaxes as early as the 80s? I can't know for sure, as no definite evidence has cropped up, despite researchers investing many hours in perusing Usenet archives. There's another theory about how this all got started, however, and this is the theory that I subscribe to, as it makes perfect sense. The Polybius legend, like all true legends, is based on fact, but it's been exaggerated, distorted, and fundamentally changed so much that it bears very little resemblance to the actual truth. If you remember, people can't seem to agree what sort of game this was, but the most common thought is that it was a space shooter very similar to Tempest. Well, Tempest was released in 1980, but some early versions of it had problems with the graphics that caused gamers to experience bad side effects, including dizziness and nausea. This didn't happen to everybody, but to people with photosensitive epilepsy, a fairly common medical condition. If you open the instruction manual to any video game, including modern ones, you're likely to find a warning that people with photosensitive epilepsy should consult a doctor before playing video games. The fact is, games won't cause a problem most of the time, but in this case, Tempest did cause issues. The problem was found to be caused by an issue with the game's vector graphics in certain defective cabinets, which were recalled and replaced. So, like in the game of Telephone, the story became exaggerated and distorted to the point where the game wasn't even Tempest at all, but a Tempest knockoff created by a mysterious company with a sinister-sounding German name, and that it had the side effects that were much more severe. That being said, one last warning before I sign off on this one. If you do decide to download and play the PC game called Polybius, be warned, it actually can cause a reaction if you have photosensitive epilepsy. So, if you know that you have that issue, it's probably best to just stay away before you go starting a whole new legend. Join me next week and I'll talk about something that puts Polybius to shame. We're going to 11 on the ridiculous meter.